struggle was not bread. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, being confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon and welcome to AZAPO online series. My name is Khauntebali Nodoba. I will be playing host this afternoon in this webinar on a very interesting topic: immigration policies and practices in South Africa, bad policies or inept government. I'm playing host to two speakers who are comrades who have been at this for quite a while. First on the menu is Comrade Mark Mfikoe. Comrade Mark Mfikoe is the former president of AZASCO in his history of the Black Consciousness Movement and AZAPO. And Comrade Mark is currently occupying the position of Secretary for Manpower and Utilisation in AZAPO. Comrade Mark is no stranger to this platform of AZAPO Online. He's currently in business, and he had indicated to me offline that I should not, he's very modest, I should not get into much detail. Suffice it to say that in his working world, he was an academic as well. He was in academia at UNISA. And then thereafter, he decided to branch into corporate. He decided to branch into engineering. And he is now then an entrepreneur of note as well. Then I've got Comrade Dr Tiri Chinyoka. Comrade Dr Tiri Chinyoka is an academic and lecturer at the University of Cape Town. He holds a PhD in applied mathematics from Virginia Polytech Institute and State University in Virginia Tech, USA. Now, he has served at this particular institution as an adjunct professor, a position to which he was appointed after completing his PhD. He is currently a member of academic staff, like I indicated, at UCT, and he teaches on courses from the fields of mathematics, applied mathematics, and mechanical engineering. There's a link between him and Comrade Mark. His academic research focuses on developing and understanding scientific solutions using the tools of mathematics and applied mathematics to contemporary world problems in engineering and in the health sciences. He's a registered professional natural scientist with the South African Council for Natural Scientific Professions. He was inducted as a member of the South African Young Academy of Science, SAYAS, in 2013. He was elected as a member of the Executive Committee of the South African Association for Theoretical and Applied Mechanics from 2008 to 2014 and served as the Vice President of SAM from 2012 to 2014. He is a recipient of the Claude Leon Foundation Merit Awards for Young Scholars, which was awarded in 2012. He's also a recipient of a multiple of excellent performance awards in his role as a residence warden at UCT, wherein he has primary responsibilities to the academic and social development of students. Ideologically, Comrade Tiri Chinyoka positions himself as a social justice activist for genuine transformation and change. Hence, his association with a social justice movement such as the Black Academic Caucus at the University of Cape Town. Comrade Tiri Chinyoka is on a critical skills work visa in South Africa, and he hails from Zimbabwe. So he's a Zimbabwean citizen. Today, we are to hear the views or get the views of my guests on a very topical issue, very topical subject, immigration in South Africa, or immigration in the continent. In fact, immigration in the world. The topic is crafted immigration policies and practices in South Africa, bad policies or inept government. There is currently much attention on South Africa's immigration policies and practices, especially with regards to what one can term border controls and general management of the movement of people in and out of South Africa. It would seem, members of the audience, that there is little to no effective structured control by the Department of Home Affairs in dealing with the issue of asylum seekers and generally in dealing with immigration in this country. Now, focus in this country when we talk about immigration seems to be on foreign nationals of African descent from the African continent. The question is, should immigration only be focused on foreign nationals of African descent in this country? Or should immigration be immigration and focus on all foreign nationals? Another issue that I think we need to explore in this webinar, which my guests will talk probably to it, is the allegation or the view or the perception that South Africans are xenophobic because there is attacks on foreign nationals of African descent. I will allow my guests to share their views with us. Maybe let me start with the Secretary for Manpower and Utilisation of AZAPO, Comrade Mark Mfikoe, to share with us what his views are on this topic, immigration policies and practices in South Africa, bad policies or inept government. Over to you, Comrade Mark.
Thanks, Comrade Noto. The topic, as you say, and for me, it's significant that we are sharing this platform with Dr. Tiri Chinyoka, who is a citizen of Zimbabwe. And I am making this point just so as if there's anyone that may have missed it in your introduction, let it be known that is the case. And I'm glad that you organized him as a panelist, given what is happening in South Africa today. Just by way of introduction, there's a thing in the world, it's called sovereignty. Now, sovereignty attaches to every country that considers itself a sovereign and it has been recognized as such. South Africa, Zimbabwe, England, United Arab Emirates, Botswana, Mozambique, you name them, all lay claim to this concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty means that there are borders, that there are laws, that the laws would be in line with international standards, that entry and exit is controlled, that people are known when they are exiting the country and when they are entering the country through border controls and all laws attached to immigration. I've traveled a bit, and I can tell you that there is probably nothing different between the laws relating to immigration and citizenry in occupied Azania today compared to other places in the world. I've been to Tanzania, Lesotho, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia at home. And I've been to various places in Europe and the United Arab Emirates, South America too. If you are a visitor, you are a visitor. If you have issues that you need the country to help you with, you have got issues to help the country, for the country to help you with. But all those things are orderly, done within the concept of sovereignty. But here's the thing, is that no country exists in isolation. No country is a drop on its own and has got no relations anywhere. In fact, any country or any citizen that may consider a connection and interaction with others elsewhere would be very myopic, and it would actually be self-defeating. People have skills that we need universally. I mean, the recent example of the coronavirus teaches us a lesson, that which we eventually could use was developed by scientists around the world working together, others at a faster pace than others. But eventually the product that was used became applicable and got used in the countries whose scientists may or may not have participated or may not have even made the breakthrough. Is because throughout the world, we work with each other. And some go and they distribute their skills elsewhere where they are needed. And that is, you have got two reasons for that. One is humane. The other one is professional exploration. If you are a professional and you have got an opportunity to go and exploit your skills elsewhere or advance in research or help the universe, because that which you know and the level at which you have developed it cannot be confined to one little village or one little country. The world needs it. You then make it available to the world. The world is then able to use it. We are talking on Zoom now. This Zoom was not created in South Africa. It was not created in Zimbabwe. It was created elsewhere. But it is a tool that is available to all of us, that I'm able to sit in Jericho and you are able to sit in Cape Town, and we are able to have a conversation with many others that we don't even know where they are. So the world needs each other. That's the point that I'm trying to make. The world needs each other. The issue, going back to your question, immigration laws and policies and practices in South Africa, is it inept government, or are they bad policies in themselves, or is it xenophobic in terms of the way people react? It's simply failure to govern. That is why you will not find me at any point asking government to do anything, because governing is not what they are able to do. There is nothing wrong with the rules. If there is, whatever is wrong pales into huge insignificance when you compare that with the incapacity, failure to commit, failure to govern by the ANC government today. That is what it is. And I've also heard a commentary that those that protest against foreign nationals in the country are targeting Black people or Black Africans in the various places where they find themselves. That analysis is probably correct, but can only be so partly. And here's why. You need to see the advent of people moving into South Africa within the context and the conflicts that arises out of that within the context of apartheid. The people that move in do not go to Sandton, and if they move to Sandton, then the people in Sandton are not threatened by that, because they are able to earn their living undisturbed. It is not the Aspaza shop that is going to be competed against. People have got skills that protect their income and capacity to earn a living. But because of apartheid, that kept Black people in areas of poverty. The only place where these African Black people that come into the country go to is exactly those places. One is that they're only able probably to afford to live there, because they're not going to be able to pay 15,000 rand a month rental in Sandton. They'll probably be easier to raise and pay rent for 300 rand in Alex, or pay next to nothing in Jericho. And as a result, the mingling happens within where Black people live. So those Black people living where they are, competing against each other for whatever it is that they need to, is a problem. But here's the thing, is that failure to govern has resulted in people being able to get into the country illegally. When they are illegal in the country, when I'm in a particular country and it is not known that I'm in that country, I'm not known in that country, I'm not traceable in that country, it gives me immense capacity to do bad or good. And if I do bad, I will not be caught. Now, any criminal will tell you that the worst thing that they fear is being recognized and being caught when they have committed a crime. Now, if you don't know me, if you have got no document about me, if you have got no records about me, and I'm desperate, I need to leave, I need to survive. And those of us that are in the legal profession would know, and I think it's almost common knowledge, that if I kill a person, in order for me to survive, it's okay. If I'm sailing with you and this boat is about to go down, and it is about to go down because of your weight, and if I don't push you off, I'm going to die. It is fine that I have pushed you off in order for me to survive. Okay. Now, here's the thing, is that there is a need to survive by those that have been let into the country illegally, or that have continued to live in the country illegally. Those that are in the country and are not free to do those things that others are able to do that are not known, then obviously feel threatened, feel uncomfortable, and feel angry. And they act out against the nearest thing to them. And me and you will then say to them, why don't you attack the Chinese? But the Chinese are in some Chinatown somewhere, living amongst their own, and they're okay. Why don't they attack the Italians and Greeks and whatever? They are sitting in Bedford View and they are all okay. So it is effectively a conflict amongst the desperate. It is a conflict amongst those that have been forced into inhumane settlements as a result of apartheid. So effectively, the impact of apartheid begins to affect those people that probably never even knew it existed. If somebody was living in utopia and came into this country 10 years ago would have probably not experienced apartheid firsthand in the crude manner that it was, but becomes a victim of that same apartheid because when they get here, they are either going into the villages, the slums, and the townships where there is trouble. And when they are there, they find any way to survive. Any way to survive. And that way to survive results in conflicts because one, competing for the same resources, but also that we see you as a foreigner and you are free to do a whole lot of things that we can't do because we will be caught, we are known. You are not. And lastly, the point I want to make is that immigration is a universal thing. It is not a South African thing. It is universal. The difference with others, at least everywhere that I have traveled, is that there is control, there is law, there is governance. I do not overstay in Botswana by 5 minutes when I visit that country. Because I declare as I enter that country that this is where I'm going, this is the reason why I'm here, this is where I'm going to stay, and tell you what, by 12 o'clock on this particular day, I'll be out. Now that's what we do, that is what all of us need to do. But because of the problem of governance, we are not doing that. Now, if you have opened the hole, we're going to use the hole. If human beings have shown that they are and will do that, as long as they do not get caught. Last point, it has to be the relationship with the land. As I said, immigration is a universal thing. We protect the land so as the sovereign can remain. Now, there are other countries, United Arab Emirates is one of them, where even the citizens of that country cannot own a piece of land forever. They've got a maximum of 100 years. After 100 years, it reverts back to the state. So as the state remains in charge of the sovereign land, in this country, the land is being sold to everyone, anyone, and it becomes privately owned. And that compromises the sovereign. And it is that part of immigration and acquisition of property in South Africa that we do not talk about. I can tell you now that probably Cape Town has got the most foreign-owned land than probably any other part of this country. Very often I've visited farms which have lodges and have got game drives and found them to be owned by Belgians and other people. But that part, when we talk immigration, we don't talk about, we only talk about the Dudula one because it is in the news and it is in relation to Black people and it is crude, inhumane, and to be honest, revolting. But we need to understand where this entire thing comes from. It comes from the failure to govern, but also the failure to recognize that this country needs to be a sovereign that needs to be protected, almost in the same way that the people in the United Arab Emirates are able to protect their own. I'll pause there and give the honorable doctor an opportunity to give the audience his piece. Yeah.
No. Thank you very much, Comrade Mark, for your views, and we heard you, and we will interact with you. We at this stage want to hand over to Comrade Tiri Chinyoka to share his views on the topic. To remind the audience, the topic of today is immigration policies and practices in South Africa, bad policies or inept government. Comrade Tiri Chinyoka.
Thank you, Comrade Hao, and thank you, Comrade Mark, for the views that you have shared, a number of which resonate with what I'm going to speak to today. I want to thank AZAPO for inviting me onto this platform to share my views on this very important and critical contemporary issue that most people see as controversial, but it needs to be ventilated. And I am pleased to notice that there are organizations out there such as AZAPO that are now taking the lead in ensuring that you bring multiple stakeholders to the table to share their views, inviting a foreign national such as myself to come and speak on this platform on this topic. So I want to thank you for that. So on a lighter note, so the issues that I'm going to talk about, because it's a very, like I said, in some circles, this is considered to be a very controversial topic. I don't see it that way. I see it as something that needs to be talked about. So when we're university students, when you're talking about topics such as these ones, especially looking at myself and my circumstances as to where I originate from. So you always had to consider issues of, yeah, we have, multiple freedoms under various constitutions that you'll be living under. And the freedom of speech is recognized in various constitutions. So as university students, we used to say, we need to put that into context to distinguish between freedom before, freedom during, and freedom after speech. So I'm glad that I've had the freedom before, and I'm going to have the freedom during the speech. As to what happens after I've given the speech, let's wait and find out. Okay, so thank you for the invitation. So to put maybe the topic into context from my own viewpoint, I pose it as what are the fundamental questions that we need to ask in order to ask the question that is on the table? All right, so to further problematize the question by asking further questions. So first, let's put it into context. What are the fundamental drivers of immigration? So from the perspective of potential immigrants, or what are the drivers of immigration policies from the perspective of governments? Because governments have to enact immigration policies. So in order for them to do that, they need to, to have the proper context as to why they need those kinds of policies. And from the immigrant as well, there is drivers that would drive them into immigration. And those drivers are interconnected. So if I start from the government perspective, for example, there are two that are, in my view, I would identify as drivers for immigration policies, right? Of course, the first one, in its ideal sense, it must be the need to address critical skills gaps, right? So you notice that in your country, in the economy, there are certain skills that you want to consolidate. So you want to consolidate those skills. You may be in the process of developing such skills within your own workforce or within your own citizenry. So you want to consolidate those skills using, like Mark says, we are a global village, right? Using foreign personnel, right? So that's one. Of course, that would be in the ideal sense. Of course, most governments use it in the not so ideal sense, is in that, which I think would be largely the context in South Africa, that you not only want to consolidate the skills that you consider to be critical, but you actually want to use immigration policies to address skills shortages. So in other words, there are actually no certain skills are actually largely absent from the economy, and you would want to now address the absence or the shortage of those skills used via immigration, without having solid policies from other sectors to actually address the skills shortages. So the issue to address skills shortages or to consolidate skills would be the first one from government perspective in trying to craft immigration policies. Of course, from a potential immigrant, as Mark has already indicated, so somebody like myself, you're trying to say, look for professional or economic opportunities in foreign lands, so that becomes now a motivation or a driver for a potential immigrant to seek immigration opportunities outside of their home country. Right. So the second driver will be, I think Mark also alluded to this, the issue of humanity. So you want, governments would want to address humanitarian crisis. So via either asylum seekers or via refugees, right? So you want to take in foreign nationals because you want to respond to your common sense of humanity, that we are all the same. So if somebody out there is facing humanitarian crisis, so we can open our doors to try to accommodate and help them. Right. So from the government perspective, then that the second driver, where they would want to address issues of refugees and issues of asylum seekers based on humanitarian grounds. Right. And of course, from the perspective of the asylum seekers and the refugees themselves, is that they want to find a safe haven from whatever they might be facing in the countries that they are currently in. So those will be the two, in my view, fundamental drivers for immigration and immigration policies. Right. So it means now, in addressing the question, we need to look at how governments then go about trying to address those two fundamental points. Right. So specifically, of course, then problems arise, right, when instead of now, so like Mark has said, the issue of control. So if the government's immigration policies and practices, so there is a policy, it's nice to have a policy, but in practice, does it actually find effect in practice? Does the government exercise control over its policies? Is it able to control the migration of people who are coming in based on their skills or professional motivations, right? Does it have a way to document and control their coming into the country and in tracking where they may be in the country and whether they're actually adding value to the country in terms of those skills, those critical skills that they may be bringing? So the issue of control, right? And also it's the same thing when it comes to the issues of refugees and asylum seekers. Does the government have sufficient controls in place to ensure that there is a proper process of controlling migration due to humanitarian grounds? And not only that, do you have a plan in place as the government when you bring refugees and asylum seekers? Because I know in some countries they have this thing of putting refugees in what are called refugee camps, right? Which is not the policy of the South African government. So when you bring refugees, what exactly is the plan? What is the practice of then embedding them as part of the community, right? What are they going to be able to do in the community? Because unlike the other class of immigrants, they may or may not be bringing what the country may consider to be critical skills. So how then does the government plan to ensure that those kinds of people coming as asylum seekers and refugees are put in as part of the community? Right? So does the government have controls in place, and does it have a plan in place for it to ensure that there's going to now be immigration based on humanitarian grounds, so that the people come here, they're going to gel nicely and fit into the communities in which they are embedded. So wherein lie the problems that largely, I think, in the South African context, the perception is that the government does not have those kind of controls, either for immigration due to skills and economic opportunities, or immigration due to humanitarian grounds. So what then that translates into for the observer on the ground is that now there is what they believe to be a problem of undocumented immigrants. All right, so people who may come in to the country for whichever purpose, but they are undocumented, and then that also leads to cascading effects, right? Which we might then put into the context of the issues that we are facing in South Africa at the moment. Okay, so with those issues in mind, what are the drivers for immigration and immigration policies? What are the challenges that governments face, especially the South African government, in terms of putting in place controls to ensure proper documented processes? Right. So we should also point out that so when governments do enact immigration policies, right, so they do that, of course, based on trying to respond, like we already indicated, to the contemporary realities in the country, whether it's to address certain critical skills shortages, or to respond to humanitarian crisis. But because governments, especially democratically elected governments, they must be responding because they are governments of the people, by the people. So it means the decisions they make, the policies they craft, they must reflect the circumstances and the will of the citizenry. If that does not happen, then there's going to be issues. If there are sections of the citizenry that believe that the government policies do not address their circumstances, then there are going to be issues, and we're going to address them. Of course, governments, in addition to also trying to address the realities and circumstances of their citizens, they also have to respond, like I say, to social justice, humanitarian considerations, and so forth. But in doing so, they must be guided by proper ethics, because then we have, for example, what is happening in the UK and Rwanda at the moment, where people who are seeking refugee or asylum seeker status in the UK, there's an agreement now that they get sent to Rwanda for about 5 years. So is that an ethical thing to do? Does that not entrench issues of racism? Is that the same treatment for all foreign nationals who will be seeking asylum seeker or refugee status in the UK? Specifically right now, if we look at the conflict in the Ukraine, the refugees coming from the Ukraine being treated with the same policy, or is that policy reserved for Africans? So questions of ethics then come in. So governments, when they enact these policies, they should also take into account social justice and ethics. Right, and of course, like we said, you don't want to have policies that are white elephants. So you want to actually ensure that the policies that you have, the practices that you have, the immigration practices that you have, indeed reflect the spirit and the letter of the policies. Because remember, in crafting the policies, the governments, they don't just wake up and craft a policy. They have to go to the representative structures such as parliament, which is supposed to be the voice of the people who elected the government. And then, so policies are built in a participatory framework. Right? So policies that you build in a participatory framework, you don't want them to just have them sit as white elephants, and then the practice becomes something that the person who says Minister of Home Affairs now enacts a practice that is completely removed or disconnected from an agreed policy. So all those considerations the governments would need to take, and failure by the government to take into account those three aspects that I've mentioned would also now lead to conflict, which is what we are seeing again in South Africa today. So if I can then, in my view, summarize what I see as would be the contemporary challenges of South Africa's immigration and immigration policies, will be firstly that the Department of Home Affairs, in crafting the policy, say via Parliament and so forth, the policies tend to be disconnected, or they are not congruent. Right? So there is policy incongruency between the immigration policies and practices on the one hand, from the Department of Home Affairs, and the policies and practices of the other departments of government. So there is sectorial incongruence. Right? So the government has multiple sectors. So you have, for example, labor, higher education, mining, agriculture and fishing, financial services, technological sectors, and so forth. So all those sectors of government, their various policies and practices must be congruent to the Home Affairs policies and practices, especially as far as the human resources is concerned. And so in my view, there seems to be a disconnect between the various sectorial policies, and that leads to big problems. I'll give a few examples and then I'll pause there to allow for engagement. So if I look at, say, the labor sector, so the Department of Labor and the policies that it crafts, right? So most of the policies, I think the average person would view them as being disconnected from the fundamental reason why we live in what is supposed to be a democratic dispensation. Right? I think the average person out there would believe that the democratic dispensation came about as a result of the fight, like Mark correctly said, Comrade Mark said, we come from a legacy of colonialism and apartheid, right? So the democracy and freedom were not for their own sake. They were there to address fundamental problems that came about as a result of apartheid, especially colonialism more generally. So the issues of racism, systemic racism, the land question, the issue of economy, the ownership of the economy. So those are fundamental questions that the democratic dispensation was supposed to address. Right? So if we address the land question, everyone would agree that maybe not, definitely not. If we address the issue of the ownership of the economy, most people would say definitely not. If we address issues of systemic and other forms of racism, and the answer again will be in the negative. Right. So then when you have labor policies that are not at their core face designed to address those fundamental aspects, then it means the average person on the street realizes that maybe they might have been sold a dream by democracy. Right? So the Department of Labor would have had to now craft policies that would fit in the immigration policies of Home Affairs, in that when we look at what we as a government look at our fundamental drivers of immigration in terms of trying to bring in critical skills, do our labor policies address the skills shortages in our country on the basis of the South African citizens. And does the average South African citizen can they look up to the policies and say they can be empowered by the policies in order to compete in any sector of the economy? Right. So that would be a challenge, right? So then where you now have, so I can connect the Department of Labor to almost all the other sectors, the higher education sector, the financial services sector, the technology sector. So if I look at higher education and say technologies, in technology, we just had in the past few weeks that the Department of Labor went, for example, to Huawei and said Huawei was the most uncompliant company in terms of employment equity, right? So maybe over 80, over 90% of the employees were Chinese nationals. In the higher education sector, the same story exists in historically white universities, such as the university where I am, the University of Cape Town, where if I look at the academics, so the absolute majority of the academics will be white academics, right? And mostly from overseas, right? So the question would be, do we have policies in place in the various sectors that can empower average South African to be able to compete for any level of skill in the economy? The answer is not. So you see that now on the high skills end, or the so-called critical skills end of the spectrum, the economy is still largely in the hands of foreign nationals, especially foreign nationals of white descent, of European descent. So, and the average South African does not have the skill to compete in those. And then you look at now the Home Affairs policies that have poor controls, right? Whether it's poor border controls or poor controls in general, which now allows whether it's refugees or economic migrants of all shapes and forms to come in as undocumented immigrants. And because they are undocumented, the mostly jobs that they will compete with are the low-skilled jobs that the average person in the country, because they are scarce in themselves, we have unemployment numbers that are record high. The unemployment mostly will be limited to the low skills end of the spectrum. And that's where now the locals find themselves competing with the immigrants. And that is the source of huge problems. Right? So what we then see manifesting, as Mark says, is that now the conflict that we're going to see is going to be conflict arising out of those environments in which locals are competing with immigrants. You're not going to see, for example, within the JSU or UCT, an operation coming in to say, for people saying, we are skilled for these jobs, we are being refused these jobs. Right? Because the government does not have policies to skill people to compete at those levels, which is what we need to address. Right? Whereas at the lower skills spectrum, right, because of lack of controls in immigration, everyone is now competing at that. Conflict then arises at those in those spectrums. So that's where now, if we look at now the question as to what people would call xenophobia, which most of us would look at as Afrophobia, it's because we are only seeing the conflict with a magnifying glass at the low skills level. Right? At the high skills level, nobody is shining those spaces under a magnifying glass, right? For example, UCT had a commission to investigate institutional, structural, systemic racism, call it what you may. And they say the university structure must be rethought, right, in order, among other things, to ensure that there is redress in employment equity and so forth. Right. But there is no spotlight shown on that because there is limited conflict that we see. That the conflict that we see that is mostly from student social justice movements because of the injustice that they themselves face as students, whether it's due to historical fee debt and all that kind of stuff. So that then get magnified. But when it comes to employment equity, it does not get magnified as such. What we see being magnified in the media is the conflict at the lower end of the spectrum. And then that becomes now the basis of our discourse. Yeah, let's come and talk about Operation Dudula and so forth, which to me will be missing the point because we are now allowing ourselves to be dragged into just focusing on the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, right, without actually trying to address the bigger issues as to the sectorial disconnect of the policies across the various sectors that are completely, so the immigration policies are completely disconnected to the sectors. So I'll pause there for now to allow the moderators to bring in the views of our audience and participants. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Comrade Chinyoka. You raised a lot of interesting issues, and also thank you to Comrade Mark. And I see Comrade Chinyoka and Comrade Mark that on social media is already a buzz with the earth-shattering and provocative views that both my speakers have presented us with. Now, I would like to engage with you, and I would like to say to members of the audience that we are going to allow, and we see some questions are coming in. So if they can throw in some questions in the chat, rather in the Q&A, and also some comments in the chat, so that we can then have a look at them as we move along. But also to then say if there are members from the audience that really want to make a contribution in terms of how my panelists have basically positioned the topic. Just to remind the audience and those that are with us here in Azania, in the diaspora, in the world, immigration policies and practices in South Africa, bad policies or inept government. Comrade Chinyoka, maybe let me go to you. I'll get to Comrade Mark. You basically gave us what you call the drivers for, or rather the fundamentals for establishing policies on immigration, and you looked at them from the perspective of government, but then you also looked at these particular, then you call them the drivers, these drivers towards immigration, You also then said you looked at them from the perspective of the immigrant. I will get to that later. Comrade Mark then told us that the problems that we have, which is the dimension that we have come up with, Comrade Chinyoka, of the low skills level and the high skills level. He then says, because then people that find themselves in the low skills levels and are staying in townships and in areas that are economically suffocated because of this apartheid spatial arrangement, all right? He then says, then there will be conflict, and both of you are in agreement there. Now, Comrade Chinyoka, help us here, and I want you to help us here to say, I hear you say there might not be much of your similar movements or operations like we have in the townships. That might happen in suburbia and also in particular in higher education at universities. But how so, Comrade Chinyoka? Because in terms of the statistics that we got from Stats SA, the majority of the unemployed now are becoming what one can say people in the skills levels end. And in this case, these are your graduates, right? And if that is the case, it then means that the problems are there. Maybe it's something that has not been ignited. Maybe it needs a dudula of some kind in higher education. What is your take on that, Comrade Chinyoka? And we'll get to Comrade Mark later on. What would your comments be if a graduate sitting there say, but Comrade Chinyoka, I am also like the people in the townships who feel threatened because, for instance, if you look at the stats in higher education, like we know, UCT, as you had mentioned, has come up with some commission. They called it the IRTC. And one of the findings is that there is no one that came before the commission who did not say the institution is not racist. But also, in terms of the stats, from an employment equity point of view, who are the people who are employed in the majority? It will be white, foreign, male, academics. But in terms of the continent, in terms of South Africa and Africa, who are the majority employed? Is it South African males, Black, or what is the picture? Can you just give us that context by addressing in particular this issue of the unemployed Black graduates?
Yes, no, thank you, Comrade Howard. That's a fundamental point. And it speaks to the sectorial disconnect that I was highlighting. So I'll start with an example. All right, maybe I should have put the disclaimer at the beginning that I speak here, the views that I'm sharing here are my own independent views, not those of UCT. And even though I belong to the Black Academic Caucus, I'm also not here representing the Black Academic Caucus. The views sharing here are my own views. Right? But as the Black Academic Caucus, we had to go all the way to the Constitutional Court for a reason to fight for a Black South African, categorized as African. So Black African, South African woman, professor, who could not get a job at UCT as like a management job. Let me just put it as a management job. So and that job went to a foreign white national from overseas. So that there should answer your question, that if such a highly qualified person, like African woman, South African professor, cannot get a management job at a university for which she ticks every box about the job suitability, the job qualification, then the story would be quite dire for the average graduate. And the reason for that, like I said, is the sectorial disconnect of the policies, where you have, right, the policies, the immigration policies are not strong enough to tie into, because if you look at the Department of Labor in terms of their employment equity policies, right, they are not strong enough to require the various sectors to actually ensure that qualified South Africans, especially those of marginalized historical backgrounds like the Biko Blacks, if they qualify, they must be prioritized. right? Whereas if you look at now, so the various policies, whether it's immigration policies and labor policies, a university can advertise and say, this is a critical skill. So we should not be tied down to certain internal labor policies. So we should be free to appoint whoever we want. So you will see that most skilled positions, because of that disconnect, would now be occupied by foreign nationals. Right? So if you look at a university like the University of Cape Town, for example, or most of the financial services sector, where the institutions are occupied largely, the decision makers are largely foreign, white, male. The selection committees are going to be reflective of that. They will also be largely foreign, white, male, and they are not going to be incentivized to empower locals, right? Because there is no policy that strictly says they must prioritize this category of people. They'll just say it's a critical skills job. Let me call Tiri in, because Tiri is an applied mathematician who got his PhD in the US there. So we're going to take Tiri versus a student who got a PhD at the University of Limpopo. So that's why there is now this dissonance as to, but I have a degree, I still cannot get a job. So it speaks to all the issues that I was talking about as well, the issues of that. I mean, there is really no incentive in the institutions and the economy to empower the local persons from historically marginalized backgrounds.
Thank you, Comrade Chinyoka. While you are there, but I'll come back to you. I want to bring in Comrade Mark here to say, Comrade Mark, you spoke about the issue of competition, like Comrade Chinyoka has spoken about the low skills and spoke about the apartheid spatial arrangement. But then your gripe, Comrade Mark, is that what we see is the manifestation of failure to govern. And Dr. Chinyoka is speaking about the issue of policies. There appears to be a dissonance between the policies and the practice. Comrade Mark, talk to us. What do you mean, failure to govern? Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, the Minister of Home Affairs, will say, but what are you smoking, Mark? Because we are now on a daily basis almost unearthing all these particular corrupt problems. We are getting rid of all these bad elements in Home Affairs. And we are actually positioning ourselves in terms of best practice in dealing with matters of border controls, in dealing with issues of efficiency, in terms of application and consistency with immigration laws in this country. So, Comrade Mark, someone from the ruling party, from the government will say, in Home Affairs, what are you talking about? What would your response be, Comrade Mark?
Well, it's easy matter. Go to Hillbrow and see whether or not you are succeeding. Go to Sunnyside and see whether or not you are succeeding. Go to Alex, go to Diepkloof, go to Jericho and see whether or not you are succeeding. And the taste, as they say, is in the pudding. These places that I'm talking about are taken over. Go to the center of Durban. Go to the coastline in Durban. Go to Long Street in Cape Town and see what has been taken over. The taking over, particularly in illegal activity, and I would repeat this as a question that was actually given to me in the chat as in the Q&A, and that is it just an issue of economic regression, or is it an issue of control? I tell you now, it is a much bigger issue of control than anything else. They have failed to control to a point where they are not even able to tell us how many people are in South Africa. They don't know. Now, if you don't know how many people you need to be planning for, how do you even begin to plan? How do you even begin to say you need so many hospitals? How do you do that? You don't know how many people there are in the country. You don't know. So what is it that you are controlling? What home affairs are you? When you are not able to tell us, when you are not able to tell yourself how many of those people are in the country today. Now, we rely on a government to govern. It fails to govern. And Matao, I will say to you that the biggest trouble is caused by the fact that needs of citizenry are compromised. One, safety. Hillbrow is a scary place. Sunnyside is a scary place because what you encounter there and the freedom that that person that you are going to encounter has over you is stunning. It's stunning. You are basically, it's a matter between you and your God to look after you when you find yourself in situations like those. Now, you can't, as a government that is supposed to look after my safety and security, not place yourself in a position where you'll be able to do so. Porous borders. No, they have failed to govern. Let's face it. And when they said do, when you fail to govern, what you leave is a vacuum that then protests against lawlessness. And here's a question that I will ask anyone that is sitting here. The reason why you are able to drive on the road is because there's a law that governs how you will drive, when you will stop, when you will overtake, the speed that you will travel at, and all those things. And you are comfortable to drive your car because in your head, the other person knows the same law and they will practice the same law that you know. That when you expect them to stop, they will stop. That when the robot says green, they will allow you to go. Okay, now here's a problem, is that you have got human beings that have got every human right there is in the world, that are in the country, but that are not bound by any law. Because when you enter the country illegal, you have immediately undermined everything that is law, that is control in that country. When the person that is supposed to uphold that law lets you be, it means that that person has failed to govern. And the unfortunate thing is where me and you experience it is in crime, in drugs, in prostitution. My brother, go to Pretoria, go to the brothels and see who dominates those places. We can't ignore the fact that our people confront these situations on a daily. We can't. It cannot be Black consciousness to allow that decay. It can't be. It cannot be a proud moment of Blackness to walk into Hillbrow and see what is happening in there and say, Viva Black. Ah, son. It cannot be black and proud when you see what is happening in the country today within the context of governance, because that governance is not efficient, that governance is ignorant, and it does not even know what it is governing. As we are sitting today, that same Motsoaledi that we are talking about goes on national TV and says there are thugs and migrants and all those sorts of people in the country. So you are telling us, but you are governing us. Huh? It's like when they go and they meet at the stadium, and they'll probably be meeting somewhere today, and they shout, the land must come back. But who are you telling this to? You are government. Huh? You are government. So they go and they toy and they jive, and the minister goes on national television and tells us that there are problems, that there is illegality, that there is corruption, that his department is in a mess, and that the country has been put in a situation of uncontrolled, undocumented illegals in the country. And I'm talking undocumented, uncontrolled across the board, not just from Africa. Okay, this is what this minister comes to tell us. But Mr. Minister, whose job is it to ensure that that does not happen? And you tell us you have not failed to govern.
Comrade, how are you on mute?
Comrade Mark, thank you, Comrade Tiri. Comrade Mark, you are harping this point of lack of governance. Are you saying our government, our South African government, is an inept government? What are you saying about the policies? Are you saying the policies are bad on immigration? Are you saying we almost have non-existent policies, or is the problem implementation of existing policies? And as you respond,
like I said in my introduction, I'm not saying that the immigration laws are ideal. And the reason why they are not ideal is because there is no commitment by government to deliver on the needs of transformation and freedom. And Dr. Tiri has mentioned some of those. For example, there is no deliberate commitment by government that the critical and scarce skills in the country are going to be occupied by South African citizens, because government will get into deliberate programs to train people to get to those levels. They haven't. They have had an opportunity since 1994 to do it. They didn't. In fact, what they have managed to do is to make it comfortable for the people that Dr. Chinyoka describes as male, foreign, to be able to find comfort in doing that which they are able to do. And government's response is academic and business freedom. That they are able to can do all these things using their own discretion and things like that. It cannot be. It cannot be. You can't rely on this government today to deliver that amount of freedom and transformation, because it was never their commitment. Their original commitment from day one, and that is evident in the constitution that they adopted, has been about preserving privilege of the previous oppressors and effectively them becoming the driver who gets told where to go. You see, when an Uber guy comes to pick you up, where they are going, it's your decision. That is exactly what has happened, is that government is the Uber driver, and they've been told by the oppressors where to drive.
Okay, Comrade Mark.
That is why, yeah.
No.
That is why they will never drive you to transformation, to freedom, to land ownership, to pure governance and delivery to Black people. My brother, if I give you a picture and I put a picture there and it's a picture of Alexander, and I take another picture and it's a picture of Clifton. If I ask anyone, choose between these two pictures, where do Black people live? And I give them a clue. I say the picture was taken in 2022. They will not fail to be able to say, this picture of Alex Kibotakida, that's where Black people live. That picture would have looked slightly nicer in 1990. In other words, these guys have managed to drive the decay amongst Black people and outdone the apartheid oppressors.
Okay, Comrade Mark, we hear you, will come to you. Now, there was a member of the audience whose hand was up, but I see it's no longer up. That was Comrade Mahauta Molefe, and I thought that I was going to allow her to come in now. But Comrade Mark and Comrade Chinyoka, there is a question here, and maybe if I can just allow this comrade to come in and aid himself, because he's been very strong about this. Comrade Richard Kanyile, I want to bring in Comrade Kanyile to ask the question. My colleague in the background will assist me to bring him in. If we can bring in Comrade Kanyile just for him to put his question to Comrade Chinyoka, but also I think it's also indirectly related to Comrade Mark. Comrade Kanyile, are you there? Can you just put your question, Comrade?
I hope you can hear me, my tower. Can you?
Yes, we can hear you, tower. We can hear you clearly.
What a vibrant discussion we have. Thank you, Comrade Mark, for this passionate explanation of issues. And my only comment that I want to do, because I've always related all our issues to the economy, that the economy as is managed by the ANC has not grown to absorb people. And as a result, the fighting is going to start. And for me, the issue of foreigners is just by the way. If foreigners were not around, we were going to start picking some of our own tribes. People who still believe in different tribes in Azania will still be identifying, maybe to say, we don't want Zulus here. because probably they are a minority, they are causing problem. It was going to be deeper because we are fighting for the scarce resources. Unless the economic transformation is driven with a clear mandate for it to be able to absorb people to employment or even to create businesses for themselves. It doesn't matter whether you have a government that has got good policies, the government that has got good laws and is implementing laws. People, when they are hungry, they will turn against that government. They will start killing each other. And if the government intervene, that same government, that's why I'm worried that if we leave out the issue of driving the economy, we are misdiagnosing and we will most likely be mistreating the problem. I think the issue as we have now stems from our economic meltdown. If the two comrades can just touch on that, how do we move the needle forward? I know that Comrade Mark is in business, probably he will give us even a clearer picture. Thank you very much, my town.
Thank you, Comrade Kanyile. Quickly before we allow the two comrades to answer, let them hold their thoughts. Comrade Sinotolo, his hand was up. Comrade Administrator, can you please allow Comrade Sinotolo in to make their input? And then Sis Mahauta as well, if we can just get her. Over to you, Comrade Sinotolo.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Am I?
You are audible, Comrade Sinotolo.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that I joined the session late and I'm a bit off topic. Not on the session of the topic, but I just have a cautionary note in terms of the speed that was happening, right? But the cautionary note partly speaks to Comrade Mark. So I do agree that the failure to govern has resulted in many of our problems, right? But the reason why I'm like, okay, let me just quickly justify. As I'm listening, I just got this concern that the manner in which we speak tends to, for example, he spoke about Lazangra and Hillbrow and the crimes that are happening there, right? For foreign nationals. We must be very careful of linking a federal government by the government in terms of like job scarcity, economic notes. I say a chat here says that the reason why foreigners do proliferate in the economy is because they provide cheap labor. That is very much true. Because they can be very much taken advantage of. They do not have the same rights as South Africans have. They do not have the same knowledge as going to CCMA. They cannot even try to anyone because they're also undocumented, right? So that's it. But we must be very careful of linking the proliferation of I don't even want to use those friends of undocumented citizens. Let's put it that way. Of undocumented citizens to that of crime, because if we were to look at it statistically, for every one Nigerian pimp, and this is a classical stereotype. For every one Nigerian pimp there is, right? There's a white man behind. Now let's go further to that. Some of the last week they spoke about scarce resources. The reason why Black people in particular are having this question of scarce resources is because of this. For every 78 cents of the rand, it's owned by white people. I am of this person that says that all Black problems, there is a white man behind. So when we speak about failure to govern, we mean actually we must also be careful about what government is, right? Governing and government is not only just economic policy, it's just not only political policy, it's also economic control. Economic cloud bias politics, it then informs law. Therefore, with that being said, if you are, let me just finish this up at this point. The reason I joined, I just want to present this cautionary note of presenting in how we speak, of there to be an implication of that foreign nationals are the problems. That's not the case. I do agree there's a failure to govern. That too is also agreeable. However, there must be some linking to like context must be read in terms of the security context. South Africa in particular has a Gini coefficient of 0.6%. It's the largest country in the world that is the highest economic inequality rate. And the other scale of that rate is what? White people. So when we speak about foreign policies and immigration policies, I just want us to know that in how we speak, we must just be very careful of presenting what the problem is. The diagnosis is very important. Let's get the wrong solution. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Comrade Sinokolo. Let's start with Comrade Mark, and then we'll go to Comrade Tiri to respond to the two inputs. We will now then also take another member after your responses from the audience. Comrade Mark, can you please put on your camera? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me deal with the last comment first. I'm giving you as honest an observation as I potentially can. And I accept that I am using anecdotes basically to help illustrate the point that I'm driving home. And that point is simply the following. I do not think that there is anyone amongst us that would promote unlawfulness, that will say that it is okay for a government to allow people to enter the country illegally and eke out a living in a country in which they have entered illegally, with no document, with no legal reason, absolutely illegal. If that is what we are pushing, or if there is any way in which any one of us thinks that way, then it would be unfortunate. I mean, we are engaging here because we expect that we will follow certain rules of engagement and debate and discussion. Order is important. Legality is important. Lawfulness is important. Now, who is in charge of upholding and executing the upholding of those laws? It's government. When government fails, I will not excuse them because no citizen asked them not to fail. Otherwise, we would have changed the laws such that they accommodate practice. We haven't. You see, that is important. And I'm using the examples that I'm using because we are alive there.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, that's the one. I'll give Dr. Tiri an opportunity to respond to the first question.
No, thank you very much, Comrade Mark. Comrade Tiri, the issue of economic meltdown, and maybe touch on also some of the aspects that Comrade Sinokolo raised, if you can. Over to you, Comrade Tiri.
Yeah, no, thank you, colleagues, and thank you to the questions raised by the participants. They're quite fundamental questions, and I see also in the Q&A. So the questions that have been asked are also linked to that. So with regards to the comments from Richard, I don't see them as a question. I see them as comments. I completely agree. Like in my own presentation, I've indicated that the problems we face are a problem that arise from the fact that the government policies have not addressed the fundamental aspects, the land question, the economic transformation. So that has not been addressed, right? So of course, without those fundamental issues being addressed, we are going to sit with these problems for the longest time to come. So I cannot disagree with anything that was said by Mark. So the comments from Sinokolo are also linked to similar questions in the Q&A from Richard and Kekeletso around who are the beneficiaries of issues around immigration and immigration policies and all that kind of stuff. And there was also a question from Comrade Richard about the reluctance for transformation in the in the universities as to what policy changes are needed to enforce that. So if I can come with an example of a recent policy that has been enacted by the Department of Home Affairs with regards to higher education. So if you get, say, a PhD, you have foreign national, if you get a PhD from a South African university. So the new policy now says you are not allowed to apply for work in South Africa. You have to now leave the country soon after your PhD. So this speaks to, it means the South African government is trying to ring fence the positions for a certain category of persons. And are we convinced that the people who are going to benefit from that ring fencing are historically disadvantaged South Africans? I don't think so. Right. So who are the beneficiaries of these policies that we see? Right. So if I look at these policies that I've just highlighted, we know that historically white universities are white in outlook, right? And the employment equity policies allow them to use their discretion in overriding the employment equity plans that they might submit to the Department of Labor. So the employment equity plans that are submitted to the Department of Labor, everybody knows those are just tick box exercises. So a university can just tell the Department of Labor that in the next 5 years, our employment equity plan is to hire 1 Black South African, 1 colored South African and Indian, or maybe 2 Black South Africans, 2 Black African South Africans, a couple of colored South Africans and 1 Indian, right? So they can put such a low-hanging fruit as their employment equity plan, and then just tick the box at the end of 5 years to say that we have met these plans. Right? So the policies from the Department of Labor do not help to assist this discourse of transformation either in the higher education sector or the economy. If you look at the kind of policies that they're enacting, right? So if now we are blocking, so if I look at UCT, who are largely the foreign postgraduate students here, they will be mostly from outside African countries, right? So students from European and American universities, they have the privilege to study across from each other, either in the US or in Europe. And then once they get their qualifications in there, they now apply for positions here, because those positions are considered critical skills. So the students who have been trained here, which are mostly going to be the Black African students, would not then be able to compete. But it doesn't mean that the fact that the Black African students from outside Africa, from outside South Africa are able to compete for those, it doesn't mean that the positions are automatically ring-fenced for Black South Africans, because then they're considered critical skills. So it means now those European and Americans who have been trained abroad now find the back door to come in as the academics. Right? So in terms of who are the beneficiaries of our immigration policies and our other sectoral policies, whichever sector you look at, it's not Black South Africans. Right? So it means we need to look at a holistic change in not just immigration policies, but every other sector. What are your policies and how do they impact on immigration? Because do those policies benefit Black South Africans? I can tell now that no, they don't. Thank you.
So Dr. Chinyoka, if we listen to you, comrade, are you then saying, you look earlier on in your input, you talked about dissonance. And I think you also used the term that you guys use in mathematics, incongruency. All right. Are you then saying, as the topic stands, bad policies or inept government, are you then saying that there should be an interaction and the policies of the various sectors should speak to one another? So as much as we talk about immigration policies and practices, these then will also then find manifestation in other policies. So in other words, it's an issue of governance, it's an issue of policy formulation, it's an issue of also taking into account the needs, the developmental needs of the country. But South Africa says it's a developing state, therefore they will, to some degree, make some of these mistakes as they move along. And I hear from you and Comrade Mark, I don't hear any sympathy that you guys are placing on this developmental state. But I hear you coming down like a ton of bricks on this particular developmental state. What would you say if someone says, but guys, come on, ours in this country is a negotiated settlement, and there are certain sunset clauses. So all these things that you are speaking about, like Comrade Sinokolo said, for every black problem or black problems, plural, there will be a white person behind you. He then went further to say, when you look at the rand, 78% of it, which means 8 cents of the rand is actually white owned. So the black people need to fight for the remainder from that. What would your comments be? And once you are done, the administrator must bring in Comrade Dr. Zodwa Dlamini, who's also one of the members in the audience to speak. Over to you, Comrade.
Comrade Nadova. Comrade Nadova, can I just deal with one aspect of this economic meltdown?
Okay, Comrade Mark, then Comrade Chinyoka will come in. Sure.
Okay, no, thanks. Firstly, let me say I do not trust government statistics.
Why is it so, Comrade Mark?
At
Why
all.
would you not trust them? Why would you not trust
Because I do not think that. Yeah. There is a lot and a whole lot of economic transactions are not even being recorded. Okay. There are a whole lot of other people that are engaged in activities for economic gain, and those activities escape government records. They do not see them, and they're not happening at all. And I'm talking the legal stuff. Of course, there's illegal stuff.
Okay.
That is also happening. You understand? But also you need to recognize running some drug at some point, and that drug was taken over by some Nigerian. That he was running some brothel, and that brothel was taken over by some Ethiopian. You don't know. That he was running this thing and it was taken over by
Comrade Mark, we seem to be having connectivity issues with Comrade Mark. Maybe he'll come back on again. Comrade Chinyoka?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Comrade Howe. So I think the issue of transformation, that's why I guess when you were reading my bio or speaking to my bio, I spoke about genuine transformation, right? So even though South Africa as a developmental state might have arisen from a negotiated settlement with the sunset process that you speak of, then a process happened 96, 97, which is the process of the Constitution, which says among one of its most fundamental rights in the Bill of Rights that citizens here, or in fact, every person here will have the right to human dignity.
Okay.
So if you have such a fundamental right as the right to human dignity entrenched as a fundamental right in your constitution, that in my view, it overrides every other sunset clause that you may have that might be in conflict or that might bring conflict to the right to human dignity. So to me, having policies in place that are so disconnected that they would lay the fertile ground, right, for blacks to be fighting and killing each other for the scarce economic resources to me, there cannot be more human indignity than that. So it means irrespective of what was negotiated in the sunset clauses, right, the fundamental right to human dignity must be upheld in government law, in the government policies. If the policies are so disconnected that they are allowing this to manifest and to continue, then it means we also don't actually believe in our own Bill of Rights.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Comrade Chinyoka. If that minister, I can bring in Comrade Dr. Zodwa Dlamini. She's one of the members of the audience to make an input, and then we'll get back to some of the comments in the chat. Comrade Dlamini, Comrade Zodwa Dlamini, over to you, my town.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great honor for me to be here, but most importantly, just to acknowledge and all of you for an amazing presentation that has been made. I come through, being very, very sad. And I know that this is not the time to be emotional about what is happening. But there's no way that I cannot be this way. You see, when we came in as a government, I thought a whole lot of things had been thought through. Comrade Chinyoka talks about the transformation, the right, the constitution, which has been acknowledged and revered globally as one of the best constitutions in the world. But what does it mean if a constitution is the best and acknowledged globally, and yet that very constitution fails its very own citizens? And for me, that is where the failure is. When we talk about all the other people, let's start here at home. The very fact that, when you look at, how, let's start with simple things that even Mark talked about. When we look at how the pictures or the photographs of, 1990 of Alex, of Soweto, you look at those, you can see cleanliness, you can see, progress, you can see people who are going somewhere. And yet today, you see the dumping grounds of an amazing note, because you just don't know whether people live there. And, as a scholar of sociology as well as of geography, you look at the rivers, along the rivers. We have never seen such crime. We have never seen so much filth. We have never seen so much pollution. And you ask yourself, even the water that we're drinking, is it clean enough? And we have already been told that a lot of it is now suspect. And when I say that, and I know that I'm going to be all over, however, the thing is, Puti, when we talk about even education itself, did we ever ask ourselves, with this education we do have, what is it that we want it to do for us? Is it relevant? Even before we bring people from outside, let's talk about what is it that we are saying about it? What is it supposed to do for the Black child? And as we are busy sending children, to universities, and they come back, and being enslaved by the very fact that they are not going to be getting any jobs anywhere because their uncles and, aunties are not, owning those, corporations where they're supposed to have even internships. What are we saying? Have we now also abandoned the very fact that we also need skills, in terms of what is it that we are doing with our hands, manufacturing? Are we still also allowing other people to do that? And it's exactly that is happening in our country. So when we then talk about the issue of all the illegal immigrants that are coming into the country, because as it has already been indicated, you come illegally. What is it that you are going to respect in this very country that you are coming into? You have already been given anyway the permission to do whatever you like in this very country, because you are even being allowed to eke your own living in this country, and even using the very people of that country, the children of our country. We are in a mess. So let me just say, Ntate, I know that I'm all over, but let me quickly say what is happening in South Africa, I am saddened because it's also happening in other countries, in Europe, in everywhere, precisely because our African brothers, our African governments are failing our own people. We shouldn't be even talking about illegal immigrants in Africa when we have so much resources that we can use that can ensure that everybody lives comfortably. And yet the very government, the very failures of, in our government system are the very ones that are stealing from the people. And you open your big mouth like the Zodwas, you find yourself out in the streets. And there are so many others. Unfortunately, Brother Nodoba, the major problem here, these people are still not going to stop coming into this country for as long as the African, countries are also have, decided to forget about good governance and respecting the dignity of of Africans throughout in Africa and in the diaspora. The problem is going to continue to happen. Unfortunately, we see it all the time. As Mark said, you go into Hillbrow, you go into Sunnyside, you go into Debs, you go into Cape Town. Those places have become squalors. You see an African person, it's like, wow, why can't you just go home? And yet, Africa is ours. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. Perhaps one will have to write down some thoughts and some point and, share with you so that, we can really address these things fully. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, Comrade Zodwa. That was a mouthful. Before my speakers respond, latching on what Dr. Zodwa Dlamini said, but also in one of the questions in our Q&A, Comrade Tiri and Comrade Mark, there is a question that they say is directed to Comrade Tiri, but I think also it relates to what one political party in Parliament is talking about. You South Africans and you South African government, what are you smoking about borders? There shall be no borders. The question is, what is your take in the open borders mandate and its effect and how it affects economically and socio-politically the situation in which we are headed to? Particularly, the question is, can we speak of one currency in the continent, like people might have in Europe, like the euro and so on? So that will be one question. But also, before you respond, I think one of the issues, I thought if we had time, we're going to play a short clip by the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, where he now explains and he breaks in silence on this issue of the UK-Rwanda agreement. So one might then maybe pose a question to both of you as my panelists, given the inputs that we have and some of the questions and some of the ones that we'll read towards the end, is the solution of these immigration problems, because it's going to be a reality, like Comrade Dr. Zodwa Dlamini is saying, is going to live with us because we, without, for lack of a better word, we've got a failed state phenomenon in Africa. So the point that one is trying to make is, shouldn't we then go the route of President Kagame to say, we will house all these people, we'll then process them nicely, and then maybe send them to their countries, or then they stay with us. Is that not maybe a solution that Britain has now bought into, and we maybe as South Africa, we need to think about it? I'm just throwing that to you, and let me hear what your responses are. Comrade Chinyoka, over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Comrade Chairperson. So the question in the Q&A raised by Comrade Zindler there speaks, like you said, to the same issues that were raised by Comrade Zodwa in a presentation. So the issue of open borders in Africa, single currency, and so forth, right? So if I look at where we are, for example, myself at the University of Cape Town, the university says in its vision that it wants to be an unapologetically African university. So there is absolutely nothing wrong in the concept of having a one Africa for Africans, right? Africa for Africans. The fundamental problem that we have is that Africa is not owned by Africans.
Mm-hmm.
So most people would want to believe that we are in the so-called post-colonial era, but as most of our young persons will tell you that they, when they talk about decolonization and so forth. So I think we are still very much in the colonial era if you look at the issues of the economy, the land, and all that. So if Africa was owned by Africans, of course, it would make absolute sense to just open the borders, because who is going to benefit? It's Africans benefiting on their own continent. Single currency would make sense, convenience, and to also compete now more, to also be more competitive on the global stage with a single unified currency that is hedged against the resources that we have on the continent, because we probably are the richest continent on the planet. So if that were the case, we'd probably have the strongest currency. But because the people who control Africa know that, and it would not be in their best interest to have a strong Africa and to have strong African countries, they would not allow that, which is why young persons, like I say, talk about the issue of decolonization. Unfortunately, of course, our various government policies across Africa do not speak to that kind of vision, right? Of true decolonization of Africa from imperialism and the chains of colonialism, because a lot of people benefit in various ways by having the status quo remain the way it is. It's just like the issues that were raised earlier on, like who benefits from the current policies that we have, if not Africans. Right. So I think those are the ideals that we would want to move towards, but unfortunately, we first have to achieve true decolonization for us to even start talking about those kind of ideal scenarios.
So President, the president of Rwanda, can one say he's on the right track?
Definitely not. is not on the right track. We would not want to have, as Africans, have the indignity of having some refugee camp somewhere, whether it's in Rwanda, Zimbabwe, South Africa, which is reserved for Africans. Because one thing I can tell you for a fact is that you are not going to see white people in those concentration camps that they want to call, whatever they want to call it.
Okay.
So that is not the way to go. I think it just speaks to the fact that we are still very much under colonialism, and our policies, whether it's in Rwanda, Zimbabwe, are driven by colonialists.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Comrade Chinyoka. So the West. I don't know whether Comrade Mark is with us for him to make an input. Comrade Mark.
Yes, thank you. Kagame cannot be allowed to establish a province of refugees in Africa in order to clean them up to the pleasure of Europe and the United States. But comrades, what is Africa? Is it simply Egypt is Africa simply because there is no sea that is dividing us and Egypt? Is that what it is? Is it really correct to say that is some unified sameness about every country that lives in that stone, that when the world broke apart, it remained together as a physical outcome of that drifting, when the drifting happened? Because I am battling to say this is Africa and how it became Africa. Are we really one to be able to talk about borderlessness, single currency, one Africa, and all that? In other words, how do we come to that? Because I know there's a name and it is saying Africa. And I know that there is a relatively unbroken land from Cape to Cairo. Okay. Now, does that mean that it is identifiable as some unified, uniform, same thing, that it can actually be identified as this one thing? One day we will have to visit that discussion and have it. Because all of these things happened because somebody had power over others and designated things for what they became. Some of them nonsensical. Like, tell me, would there be Mozambique if there was no Portugal? Would there be Botswana land or Botswana if there was no England or Britain? Similarly, Zimbabwe. Now, all these things are effectively existing because of some ownership arrangement that was done in the colonial era. They owned these things, they owned these places, gave them their names, and many of them at least. And they became what they are, and we have inherited them in the manner in which they are. One day we will have that discussion, but I suspect the day that that discussion becomes hugely relevant, beyond it being just theoretical, chances are good, me and you, Mr. Nodova, we would be dead, but it would not be because of Corona. That one we have defeated. Now, I know the discussion is scheduled to end at 3:30. Just in case I do not get another chance, I need to speak to this thing of the Constitution of South Africa allegedly being the best constitution in the world. Now you tell me, how good can a constitution be when it denies the majority to rule? The constitution of this country refuses that the majority should rule. In fact, it is a document that protects itself against the will of the people. And they call it separation of power. At some point, the Constitutional Court of this country had more power to pronounce even on policies bigger than government. That is the constitution of this country. It says that whoever is ruling is not to be trusted with power. And therefore the power needs to be in the court to control how they rule this country. Not the people that elected them. No. Some lawyers sitting in the Constitutional Court control how a government elected by the majority should rule. If that government rules in favor of the majority to the displeasure of the Constitution, a court would rule that that act is invalid. That is the best constitution of this country. And let me tell you, Nelson Mandela knew this thing very well. In the early days of this constitution, I think it was after the case of S versus Pasaka, when the death penalty was ruled to be unconstitutional. White society called for the death penalty to happen in this country, right? And Nelson Mandela turned around and he said, you are saying I should listen to you because you are the people and the people have spoken. Should I now listen to the people when they say to me that they want the land? Should I get rid of property rights because the people want it? And he killed the argument. But in killing that argument, he demonstrated clearly to all of us that the Constitution is not about the will of the people. It forever remains about the sell-out settlement of Kempton Park. The Constitution makes sure, this so-called greatest constitution of the world, it ensures that the majority can rule only if they are in agreement with it. The moment there is dissonance with whatever it is that is kept up in the Constitution, that will by the people becomes null and void. That is the Constitution that is, hence I said, all that you are having is an Uber driver.
Okay. No, thank you, Comrade Mark. We unfortunately running out of time. We have run out of time. And Comrade Sinotolo, I see you, but we've run out of time. And also some of the questions that are in the chat, we will not be able to get to them. Comrade Kekelezo talking about the beneficiaries of crimes being white people and the Chinese, all of them being foreign, but the wrath, right, of Black people is experienced by themselves, among themselves. And then in the chat, Comrade Nohuka is also talking about the frustrations that are faced by the people, and then they end up joining organizations like Operation Dudula, because as the speakers have indicated, the panelists have indicated, there is lack of governance. The Uber driver, he doesn't probably maybe listen to those that don't have money, but listens to those that control whether Uber is produced as a car. So On that note, we would like to thank all our members of the audience, and then also our panelists, Comrade Dr. Tiri Chinyoka and Comrade Mark Mfikoe, for generally a thought-provoking input where we were able to dissect issues and also talk about the elephant in the room, which is this issue of governance, lack thereof, and the policies and the ineptness of governance, and also the problems of the failed state phenomenon that we see in the rest of the continent. We thank you very much, and we would like to say till we meet next week, Sunday, on another edition of this particular AZAPO online series. But before I close, I got a message that I think we need to share with all and sundry that we just got from the media, that we learned that the president of the country has been chased away by COSATU from addressing their rally. That's a very interesting matter. So an organization like AZAPO maybe will want to respond to that particular development. So that's what we have. So we just want to say thank you very much.
Ooh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Listen, the struggle was not grand. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now. We're taking the power back. We're stronger than before. We're proud, prouder, too strong. The worst is over.